All right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Tired Boys podcast. I'm your host, Justin.
And I'm Aaron. Welcome back, everyone, for another fun episode. We're going to be talking about the Spanish Grand Prix and the review of that. We had F1 Academy, F2, F3, Formula One. There's been some IndyCar, the Le Mans 24 Hours, all happened since our last episode. So good bit to get into today. It's good to see you, man.
Yeah, good to see you too. There's, like you had said, lot to go over in the world of motorsport. Looking forward to talk about the Spanish Grand Prix. Pretty exciting one, obviously. Not the win that maybe Lando Norris would have hoped for, but still a pretty exciting race. So yeah, a lot to go over in this episode.
Yeah, and there were some slower moments of the race, but a lot of excitement with some offset strategies and everything. But before we get into all that, we'll run through some quick hitters and some different segments here at the start.
Just
You're
this
not
chatbot
2D.
for me. Yeah. So it was fun to reach out and touch you, my friend.
Circuit of the Americas is where it's a track that was created for racing.
So the race is a flat fee, and then it's the bake off afterwards where things get really kooky.
Okay, that's where all the weirdness comes in. Mercedes definitely started planning for their new car.
If Red Bull came out and was just like, Adrian Newey designed our car.
Yeah.
Whoa. Yeah, did he really?
No way. So first off, just with the 24 hours of Le Mans, I got to watch a bit of it. I saw one of the overnight stints for a couple of hours. I watched through for the last 2 or 3 hours of the race and all. It was just fun to check out. The amount of rain and everything on the track really throughout the weekend made a lot of just differences for the drivers and everything. I can't imagine driving at those speeds in the rain overnight with just headlights and one little windshield wiper flopping back and forth. It was a crazy weekend, but we had Ferrari coming out on top with their second driver lineup. So Ferrari as a team repeating from last year's victory.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Now, how long of that stint was rain?
For the nighttime, the majority of it. As it was closing down. I mean, across the 24 hours, like the circuit was wet for a significant bit. It was one of the, if I remember correctly from the broadcast, this is now, I guess 2 weekends ago, they were talking about it was one of the highest amounts of time under a full course safety car or full course caution kind of deal in the recorded history, or in the history of Le Mans.
Sure.
So okay. Just with the incidents and everything, the time to repair tire barriers, and with the rain and everything, there were multiple stints that it was like a full hour under safety car, just following along while they're making repairs and whatnot for the circuit after some of the incidents.
Okay, so very different safety protocols as well, because so it's a 24-hour timer that once started just continues running down, and then they just tighten the security of the drivers under safety car to allow for repairs to be made, but they still keep them driving.
Right, and so especially with so many cars being on the circuit from the get-go, I think there's somewhere around 60 cars at the start in all the different classes and everything. It's just kind of mayhem at the get-go of the race and all, but with how spread out that gets, especially during a caution and everything, or a safety car, the time to be able to excuse me, to have like marshals get out on the circuit to clear debris and everything in between cars gets a bit more difficult and whatnot, because there's just constantly cars lapping. So it definitely makes for an interesting like just stint of the race, I guess, when you're under those safety cars, plus like cars unlapping themselves and everything, similar to Formula One. When you have so many cars unlapping themselves to get back on to the lead lap, that process takes a really long time and all as well. So it's just definitely a different circumstance than F1, where their goal is to rebuild the barrier as quickly as possible to the like standard of safety that they require and everything, and get things back going. But yeah, overall a kind of funky Le Mans. The Toyota Gazzo team that finished in P2 was really like hunting down the Ferrari team for the last couple hours of the race. There were multiple opportunities that with the different strategies that I thought they might be able to pull it out, but I think they ended up being about 10 to 15 seconds back at the end, which is pretty wild.
24 hours, that's like very tight.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy, and they had better tire life at the end. They just weren't able to make up the difference. They I think it was about 10 seconds, but the on the broadcast they were actually discussing like if the Ferrari car comes across because the Ferrari car was also getting very low on fuel at the end, and they were like, if they cross the line just a little bit too early before that 24-hour time hits, and you have to do that next lap and a full like post 24-hour lap, then they, one, probably would have run out of fuel, or two, would have potentially gotten caught by the Toyota team. So it was really tight coming down to the finish there.
Wow, that's very exciting. Nice.
Yeah, so I mean, and like you said, for a 24-hour race, you kind of don't anticipate. I mean, there were a number of cars that didn't finish. Like there are just a number of incidents with the rain and just general racing incidents and whatnot. But to be that tight at the end of 24 hours was pretty wild. I know Robert Kubica was out there for one of the rainy stints for his team, was on slicks in the rain at one point, and went from, I think they said he went from being like in 12th place before his stint to being up by 20 seconds at the end of it, just from his like wet weather driving and whatnot, the pace he had on slick tires and everything in the rain at one point. And so just some pretty impressive drivers out there. We had talked about some of the other drivers in the World Endurance Championships, but I believe Alex Palou was also driving. Roman Grosjean, I believe, was in it. We had Nick DeVries. We had a number of just drivers across the F2 to IndyCar to former F1 driver kind of group out there.
Yeah, but still obviously top of their form drivers.
Oh, yeah.
So I take it there's like wild card or like open qualifiers in some way where like if you can, if you have the team and you can field a car, you can race. There's a larger race outside of the series,
right? Especially with the different car classes and everything that they have, having the multiple series and everything. So, but hypercar being kind of the top of that crew for the endurance championships. But just a very, very cool event. I really enjoyed getting to watch some of it. Colleen was asking me, she's like, when did you all of a sudden like get into this other thing. And I'm like, well, I know who so many more of these people are. I've started to pay attention to it a bit. I was like, trust me, I'm not going to be watching the full 24 hours probably anytime soon, but it was cool to check it out. But yeah, definitely will recommend anyone to keep an eye out for it next year. We'll of course be letting you know, but it was a very cool event. This past weekend, though, we also had a really good race and at a cool circuit. IndyCar was at Laguna Seca for their race this past weekend. There were some changes with drivers' lineups and whatnot that happened. So Teo Porcher went from coming in, taking David Malukas' spot at Arrow McLaren. Excited to be racing. He was then dropped by Arrow McLaren just due to not kind of meeting the performance that they were hoping for. Nolan Siegel came in to drive the car for Arrow McLaren instead. And okay. David Malukas, who had been dropped by Arrow McLaren, was picked up by Meyershank Racing and to drive for them now that he's healed from his wrist injury and everything that McLaren had dropped him for.
Okay.
So coming back, having not raced all season, David Malukas put in a solid drive, finishes P16. Alex Palou took pole for the race, ends up going on to win the race. But just in general, it was a fun weekend again. We've got more of our buddy Santino Ferrucci, who we talked about, and I was explaining to you. So Santino Ferrucci ended up getting a 5-minute stop and hold penalty. It was during the practice sessions, or the practice session on race day. They have a after qualifying, they have a practice session, like just like a warm up for the day, kind of on race days. And he had to like go pit and just like sit there for 5 minutes in timeout because he just like intentionally like threw the corkscrew, which is a pretty hairy part of the circuit where you have a very big downhill, very tight left to right kind of winding down that hill. And Ferrucci like was running Grosjean off the road, who did a nice little buzz by on Ferrucci a bit later on the lap and everything. Like, hey, and even the broadcast, they were like, what is this guy doing? Like, just they're like, either take it to the parking lot and figure it out, or just like move on. Because Ferrucci just seems to consistently like to do what he can to get under people's skin. So yeah, his unsportsmanlike behavior got him a 5-minute timeout.
Yeah, that's fair, and especially on my boy Grosjean. I don't think he deserves that of anybody. He's just here trying to race some U.S. circuits. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I think racing is one of those places where it's like, during the course of your event, man, like there are other contact sports, more physical sports, where like a little bit of physicality can go a long way. Unfortunately, this physicality is like, you're bumping cars moving almost 200 miles an hour. So like it's a little less obviously forgiving. And now that he's been shown to have a bit of a track record with it, a little bit of a, it's a little bit of a pattern kind of going on.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm glad that they're kind of putting their foot down and saying, nah, dog, we're stopping you for 5 whole minutes. You got to think about what you're doing and just give respect to other drivers on the course. Because, we hear on the broadcast that in many scenarios, at many speeds, in a lot of corners, when drivers are driving respectfully of each other, you can touch wheels, bump a little bit. But most of the time, like both of you, especially in the Indy cars, specifically, like you're both going to be able to make it through that corner as long as you're giving each other respect. So yeah, I'm glad they're putting their foot down on this, and like a 5 minute stop and hold. That's a significant consequence, I think, and hopefully will kind of curb it in the future.
Yeah, and in particular, like getting warmed up for a race on a circuit that it's not easy. We saw, I mean, during the race, we saw a number of people have issues at the corkscrew and everything. Christian Lundgaard, along with two other drivers, tried to go three wide through the corkscrew at one point where he ended up kind of ramping over the hill in the gravel trap, four wheels off the ground. Caught some air like he was skateboarding nearby the circuit, and just yeah, like that's not a place to be messing around in general. And like you said, like just having respect throughout, especially in a practice session. It's like why are you doing this? Just get yourself warmed up. Why are you like trying to just antagonize other drivers? But yeah, like I said, Alex Palou took pole, goes on to win the race. Grosjean actually ended up having a really impressive race as well throughout. He had a really good strategy. He was on the A strategy. Colton Herta finished P2, who was on the kind of B strategy. He was the far and away the top finisher on that strategy. So he put in just a really nice drive to even get himself up there. But Grosjean had a good shot at the podium. He was hanging on to P3 for a bit, got past with about, I think it was like 10 laps to go or so, but takes home a solid P4 on the weekend, and so
Nice.
a nice grab of points for him on a fun circuit.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I think as far as U.S. circuits go, Laguna Seca is one where, yeah, that corkscrew is one of the more like, what's the word you want to use?
I
It's
would say
got a
like
it,
unique, like it's
yeah,
yeah.
unique.
There's not
Uh,
really, and even not just that, but also the kind of last turn of the lap and everything. You have a very steep downhill and then a sharp 90-degree left, where even getting into the pit, you're doing a very bizarre kind of quick turn into the pit and all. It's a really like unique track to get to drive on.
Yeah, it makes me think of like there's certain tracks that have features that like, obviously other ones don't. Recently, thinking of that term makes me think of in Monaco the hairpin where
Mm.
they have, I don't know to what degree this is, but they talk about it on the broadcast often where they have to extend the lock of the wheel or like have like an extended side pod or whatever because of how much you have to crank the wheel going into that turn. So yeah, just very interesting problems for the drivers to solve that don't have another turn like it really anywhere else on the calendar. So yeah, that corkscrew at Laguna Seca is very fun. And when you're talking about Lundgaard launching over, I'm picturing like action movies, from like San
Oh
Francisco,
yeah.
where the cars are like ramping off the what is that like the trolley street thing? Like you know what I'm
Oh,
talking
and yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah. But like same concept. I mean,
Oh, for sure.
you, and especially the camera angle that they had. They're like three wide into the corkscrew, and then you're looking from the bottom of the hill, and you see cars coming down, and then just one go off the top of the hill and everything. It was yeah, it was wild, to say the least, and did not end up too well. He ended up losing a number of positions from it. Was able to keep going, which was a pretty big shock to me. I thought he was gonna just end up being out, whether he's stuck in the gravel trap or what there, but ends up just dropping down a few places and everything, being able to continue on. So yeah, very fun race there at the Firestone Grand Prix of Monterey. But yeah, nice IndyCar race to top off the F1 weekend.
Yeah, for sure. Now, kind of moving on, getting into the F1 weekend. At the press conference before the race, I was checking out just to see, what some of the drivers had to say. One of the more interesting things was Kevin Magnussen talking about, because at this point in the season, there's a bunch of people asking about like whose seat, what seat, where you going, what's your drive. And Magnuson on the couch was pretty candid, and Carlos Sainz was sitting next to him, and he's like, "No, no, I'm pretty sure like he's the cork in the bottle. Like once he
Yeah.
signs, like everything else." And it was funny for him to be very candid about that. So yeah, not a whole bunch of new news, but there is. It was personnel from Kick Sauber talking about that. They're in conversations with Signs. We're talking about Williams offering Signs a contract. So there's a lot to be done just with that specifically, and then I think a bunch of things just fall in line.
Yeah, and like you said, and what Magnuson said, like I completely agree with. I think Signs at this point is the cork in the bottle because there's a lot of teams that are at a relatively similar level. They're still trying to see if they can bring him on board. Before the weekend, there were reports that Williams had offered Signs a contract. I also this one page just like cracks me up on Twitter every time because they just absolutely just put out nonsense. They have been like one of the same pages that's been putting out like Ferrari signed Adrian Newey for like 3 months now and there's no official anything signed. They're just like they throw out these wild statements that are like, oh, Sainz is going to be announcing his move to Williams while in Barcelona on the weekend, and I'm still sitting here now on Tuesday after, just being like, when's that announcement coming? Because it's just so amusing. But obviously, Williams is in conversation with him. Alpine has thrown their hat into the ring as well. Haas, I'm sure, if they could get him, would take him. I think Mercedes is the only team left out there that probably is not that interested. Kick Sauber going to become Audi had wanted him from the get-go and had kind of been rumored. So he is definitely the cork in the bottle. I think that's a great term to use, but even with that seat open at Williams and all, this week Alex Albon was being interviewed and he was speaking very highly of Logan Sargent and everything as a like just having very good raw pace, and from reading a bit more, Logan Sargent has, because of the chassis issues, them having to kind of push to get the chassis built when they were down to 2 broken ones that they were driving around the circuit and everything. Logan has been driving a sub-spec like car of Albon's for like months now. He has not had a comparable car to Alex Albon until this weekend. And of course this weekend both of them looked pretty bad. They just had no pace. So I think that is interesting, like that it really, you can physically see how detrimental that's been to their progress and development of their car and everything at this point in the year from that early. I mean, that was a couple months ago that they were having issues with potentially not having a chassis and everything, and it's still they're still facing the repercussions of that. But there were also reports that Logan Sargent, being most likely out at Williams, is looking at an IndyCar drive with Prima Racing. So there's some potential options for him out there, even if it's not still in Formula One. So yeah, there's a lot going on over in the Williams camp. Alpine, of course, along with being latecomers to the Signs discussion, are also getting Jack Doohan prepared. I think this is smart. They're kind of putting their eggs in multiple baskets as opposed to going, "Up, Alonso's gone. Here, Oscar Piastri's our new driver, who we haven't officially signed." So they're actually they're taking the right steps, it seems, this time, while they're figuring that all out. Jacques Villeneuve was talking this weekend and said that he thinks that Valtteri could be a good person to fill in at Mercedes for 1 year to keep that seat warm for Kimi Antonelli to get a little more experience in Formula 2. However, we also had the announcement from the FIA that they were making changes to the super license rules, where they would allow a someone under 18 to obtain a super license. So Kimi Antonelli getting the exception, basically, to be able to potentially have that drive for Mercedes next year, which was, I think, partially one of the hang-ups potentially with Mercedes making their decision and all. But of course, there was a little bit of backlash out there from some IndyCar drivers. I saw a nice little quote tweet from Alex Rossi over in IndyCar saying, "Oh, so exceptions can be made? Huh? Like, that's weird." After Colton Herta, Alex Rossi, Alex Palou, I think all were denied super license because they didn't have enough qualifying points or whatever to get that drive over in F1 potentially last year. So yeah, very, very interesting that the FIA has made some updates to those rules when Mercedes is the ones asking, or I guess when there is someone coming up through their system that it would benefit.
Yeah, and that's my angle is, yeah, we were just having this conversation about them being very adamant on the rules and all, and maybe even being a little
Well,
like non-inclusive in some way,
yeah,
just for reasons unknown, just not wanting IndyCar drivers or whatever.
where you and I were looking at and even comparing the series and going, okay, so the top finishers in F2 get the same super license points as the top finishers in IndyCar, who has multiple Formula One drivers driving in it who are not in that top three, and you're saying that those guys are only the quality of Formula 2 drivers. Like, we had full discussions about that and how that system might need some updating and all. But yeah, now the script is flipped.
Yeah, now when it's somebody from inside the club wanting some forbidden fruit, sweet, sweet 17-year-old, they're gonna be so strong, then, I'm willing to bet money that some amount of money was thrown around to make that happen, and I'm worried. Maybe not worried. I guess the word is curious. I'm curious to see how that moves down the line, where, like, will it just be Kimi Antonelli because this guy really is like a strength, or will we actually get an influx of like not so great talents because now we've like opened it up to 17-year-olds? Maybe there's some, what's the word that I could use? Maybe there's some like solid debutante junior drivers that are 17-year-old, and now because they're allowed in, teams are going to get a look and be like, isn't that guy pretty good? Like, oh, let's get him like a test. And I mean, like, what if they're just not that great? What if they just end up being, because of their youth, because of whatever reasons, they just end up being a lackluster 20th driver on the grid, no matter kind of what team they're in. I hesitate to see rewriting rules for like one specific case. I don't
Yeah.
know, like, especially in the sense of like, I'm not the most avid every practice watcher, but to my knowledge, like we haven't really seen Antonelli in a F1 car, right?
He has done some tests with old Mercedes cars.
Okay.
So there are like testing opportunities with old machinery that happen. And so he has had some opportunities in old Mercedes cars at Silverstone or whatever that are not current year, but like 2 or 3 years ago kind of cars and whatnot. I think he got to drive the 2021, I think it was W18 or something like that. I forget which one it was, but
Sure.
the like Lewis's 2021 car, and they were like, we want him to get some time in like a good Mercedes F1 car before we have him do any testing in the side pod shenanigans cars. So he's had a little bit of time to kind of be out there. It sounds like he's done fine in those tests. I haven't heard anything like super high or super low on it. But I think I just don't know, like you said, I don't know if making this exception sets a bad precedent. I mean, there were pictures of Helmut Marko talking with some young, like 14-year-old debutante Formula 4 Mexican driver that's coming up through the ranks and who has been apparently pretty dominant and everything in that series and all. And so it's like, where does that line? Oh, Mercedes says this young. I don't know if I don't know Kimi Antonelli's like, I don't know,
Like racing
lineage
pedigree,
or yeah, like
lineage, sure.
I don't know if his dad was driver, if his uncles were driver. I have no clue. But I think like the exception that we've seen out there of Verstappen coming through and everything, like his dad was a Formula One driver for a number of years. I think that along with his performance and everything, like he's kind of why that super license rule was made, because they're like, wait, we didn't have a rule that said you have to be a certain like age to come in and everything, but
Right.
Max has proven that it can be done, but I don't think that just any 17-year-old could come in and do what Max did. Like I think he is a very unique talent, and I'm not saying Antonelli isn't, but he's also like he's having a good year in Formula 2, but he's not dominant in Formula 2. He's not like going out there and crushing everyone. He's not winning or leading the series at the moment or anything like that. So it's I think making these exceptions, like there's a reason the rule was put in place.
Now, if I'm understanding what I'm looking at correctly, he has not won in Formula 2 yet.
He is not, no.
Right. Okay. And that right there is what like makes it also mind-blowing to me that they're just ready to like rewrite the rule for somebody who hasn't won yet in like this like their most current thing. Regardless of what they've done in F4 and F3, like you would think they would be rewriting the rule for somebody who has won 12 out of 12 of those entries, and like honestly, like we need to promote him up because Formula 2 like isn't a challenge for him. Like
Yeah.
that's what would make more sense to me if he was like, if I don't want to use this word, but you understand what I mean. Like, if he transcended his current formula in some way, then it would make sense for them to say, like, okay, here's a guy that's showing 17-year-olds can just like dominate this series, and he's just getting win after win. Like, what do we do about that? I I think that's the case that I'd be, more understanding of a scenario like this. But as it stands right now, like I'll be honest with you, it sounds silly and it sounds like Mercedes is throwing some money around to like get something going in their pipeline, and that to me is silly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, looking at, like you said, someone who is looking very strong. When Max was driving in Formula 3, when he ended up getting the offer to join Toro Rosso from Helmut Marko and the Red Bull family and all, he finished third in the Formula 3 championship that year, in the European Formula 3 championship. He had 10 wins, 7 pole positions, 16 podiums across 32 starts. Like,
Yeah.
that is a very strong season. He had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He had
Well,
nine. He had 8 DNFs, and 1 did not start in that. So, like, of the races that he finished, he podiumed 16 out of 23. Like,
right.
that's strong.
Right. And then what was the next highest cumulative podiums in that same year? Like, what was the next stat of second place?
I don't know. I just looked up his specifically for
Okay,
Max,
fair
so
enough.
I'm not 100% sure. But I mean, just in general, that is like, those are pretty crazy stats. Like, to have podiumed in half of the races on the calendar in your first year in Formula 3, like, that is a pretty significant performance that I think, like, is a bit more understandable. Not that, like I said, Kimi is, I don't think he's a bad driver. I think he will be an F1 driver and could be a good F1 driver. But making the exception to the rule for him when I haven't quite seen what I think would be a reason to make the exception is where it gets a little squirrely.
For sure. Yeah, yeah. Seems a bit odd. But yeah, we'll, keep our eye on the situation, and,
Yeah.
maybe he's the next phenom, and, listeners can just point to, where we were wrong. That'll be great.
Hey, like I said, I think he's going to be a good driver when he reaches Formula One. We'll see if it ends up being next year. But like I said, Valtteri, honestly, I think would not be a terrible person. So, like, if Sainz does go away from Kick Sauber and they end up sticking with Zhou, who you are high on in terms of young, like, pretty strong talent, has been in the team for a few years and everything. You want to have some consistency carrying through and everything year to year with your drivers. Ideally, you would want to have some similar input that you're getting from the team and all. That could open that door at Mercedes, potentially for Valtteri for a year or so, before Antonelli comes up. But yeah, there's still quite a bit to fall in place here.
Very interesting. A lot to be decided. I just want to say thank you to the listeners who are here with us. If you're enjoying the show, help us hit our 100 subscriber goal. We would very much appreciate it. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Just thank you so much for listening, and we appreciate you.
Yeah, we really do. It's awesome putting this out for you guys. But let's go ahead and get into the Spanish Grand Prix weekend. Give you guys some more fun stuff to talk about here. But with the Spanish Grand Prix, we had all of the feeder series coming through. We had the F1 Academy, Formula 3, Formula 2, and all leading up to the F1 race. So F1 Academy, double pole position for Abby Pulling. She is consistently just putting her car at pole position and ready to go for the weekend. She's been driving really well, wins the first race, comes P2 in the second race, but just looking very, very strong so far in the year. She's leading the championship by a significant margin at this point, up by She has 147 points. Dorian Penn and Chloe Chambers are at 81, tied for second and third. So she's really putting a big gap between herself and the other drivers so far.
Yeah, and especially in race one, Dorian Pan had it wasn't a full stall, but like a really slow start. And so she was just like digging herself out of that the whole time. There was a early crash between two drivers. I think it was on lap one or two. So we actually had about like I think it was 6 or 7 laps under the safety car. So to be fair, like Abby Pulling really only had to like race half of that race. We saw a lot of it under safety car. So a bit of a formality there for Pulling in the first race in that scenario. But yeah, the second race was really exciting. Chambers gets Pulling off the line and just all the way from there just controls the race, controls the pace. But here's something interesting to see different size cars on the same track. This is something I don't think I ever really thought of. Is there was some very dynamic overtaking in race two because the cars are so tiny, and Catalunya being a more traditional circuit, it's like really wide. So there were a lot of sectors where like they were 3 wide, 4 wide, a bunch of like really dynamic overtaking, where you could go inside out kind of deals. So yeah, race two for F1 Academy was actually like quite exciting.
And I think in F three and F2 as well, like it really shows and makes it very interesting watching those cars on the circuit, particularly a number of those. I think F2 they have DRS, but I don't think they do in F1 Academy or F3.
No, the
So
ones in Academy are stable
yeah,
rear wings.
I believe they may have DRS in Formula 2. I could be just misremembering for some reason there, but watching the cars getting like the slipstreams that you get for overtakes and everything in those smaller cars make that so exciting. There were multiple times where throughout the weekend in F1 Academy, F2, F3, where you are getting to see cars go 2 or 3 wide as they're going through different sections. We briefly like thrown it out there watching F2 and F3 in Monaco, how bizarre it was to see cars going like side by side through the hairpin, because
Oh yeah, like actually being able to race.
yeah, so seeing it on a traditional circuit, not a street circuit and everything, it's pretty cool. And we saw a number of different drivers get some slipstreams, even some double slipstreams. So really, yeah, Chloe Chambers getting the win in the second race. Awesome to see the first Haas driver to win a race, as well as having been the first Haas driver to end up on the podium, being in the Haas Academy and everything. So pretty cool to see and hear the U.S. national anthem on the podium. So that's
actually
cool.
sick. America.
Yeah. So don't think that even though they I don't know if you'd seen, there were some photos from this past weekend, and at one point during the weekend, the Formula One graphics people were testing out the Logan Sargent win graphic on one of the like TV banners that goes above the circuit and everything, and people got pictures of it and were like, anything could happen. But yeah, I don't think unfortunately Logan's going to be bringing the Star Spangled Banner to the top step of Formula One anytime soon. So this might have been our best chance to get to hear that.
Damn, yeah, that's actually hilarious to think of all of the like driver media that is made similar, like just like Max. There's one of those, like winning flags where you got like the fist pump animation, whatever. It's funny to
Mm.
think there's so much driver media just year after year that in just big old click and drags is just like into the bin
Well, even
that nobody ever sees.
well, there was that's a thing with the F1 the intro thing video too, that apparently they have everyone across the grid do all of the different poses and things that you see. So there apparently is a folder somewhere with every single driver doing the George Russell T pose from last year's intro and everything. So yeah, there's got to be a ton of content that just is sitting collecting dust on the hard drive somewhere.
Wild, wild. But hey, at least at least these production people are getting paid for their work, whether or not it gets shown. We love to hear that.
Yeah, they put together some cool graphics and also definitely
Agreed.
a funny kind of instance from the weekend. But over into Formula 3, the sprint race started off. It was pretty decent. Lots of action, lots of little scuffles, people going wide, dust getting kicked up on the side of the circuit. But as we were getting into the race a little bit, the two Trident drivers who were running in P1 and P2 ended up taking each other out. Just the last thing that you want to see as a team, just knocking both of your drivers out of contention for the win there. But we did see a lot of contact across the board. I also know that Barcelona, the circuit is a pretty windy circuit, so I think that obviously comes into play a bit. They talked about the headwind and how DRS in the F1 race is stronger when going into the headwind because of the amount of drag that it actually gets to reduce. We saw last year with some of the gusts of wind and everything, with Max kind of going off in, I think it was turn 4, that Max and Sainz last year both ran off the road from like weird gusts of wind and everything for a moment. So I imagine with these smaller cars that those gusts of wind can probably push them around a little bit more. I'm curious how much that actually ends up having to play in some
Sure.
of these incidents that we have. But yeah, in general, a lot of just little contact and whatnot throughout those races.
Yeah, and in the feature race, I thought it was really solid. It was unfortunate for, I think the young driver's name was Van Hupen, who he's 24 laps into a 25 lap race, and that's when he makes a mistake. That's when he goes off. So like, really unfortunate to see that, especially after so many drivers getting a solid drive on the weekend. Tough to go out that late, in the feature race, but the last couple of laps were like rather exciting in that regard. Not that he went off. So there was rain that hit the track in sector 3 in the last like whatever 5 to 10 laps or so, but nobody was going to pit. Obviously, they've all staked their claim on their positions. They're not giving it up. If they're not pitting, I'm not pitting. So for the final, everybody's driving around on slicks. So I thought that was pretty exciting as the rain's coming down. Like, the jeopardy out there is getting more and more, but there's obviously like an end in sight. So you're just hedging your bet between like, okay, how long can we actually stay out here before we just start actually sliding around? And they made it through. So I thought the end of that feature race for F3 was really exciting.
Yeah, and pretty like a pretty good opportunity for those drivers too to get some practice in kind of a race scenario where you have changeable conditions and everything. With how short the race is, are in F3 and even F2, I feel like the likelihood of the conditions changing that much during your race is not as like possible. I mean, the feature race in F3 ended up being 39 minutes long. So that is, I mean, not a super long time. Very easily could be a just rain the whole time or sun the whole time, and so changeable condition. I think is good practice for those drivers too, especially being kind of stuck out there on slicks, because knowing that even if you pit for inters or wets, that you're just not going to make up the gap that you need. So yeah, definitely an interesting end to that race. Over in F2, I think my biggest highlights from that were just with Juan Manuel Correa getting onto the podium. He was the other driver who was involved with the crash with Antoine Hubert at Spa, and so he had some pretty severe injuries and whatnot as well. I think he had been in a coma like after the accident for a little bit. But to go from that 5 years ago now, which is wild how long it's been, but to kind of making that comeback, ending up getting onto the F2 podium and everything in technically both races. He ended up getting a post-race penalty in, I believe it was the sprint race that ended up knocking him down to P8. A number of drivers getting track limit violations, but a pretty cool comeback story. It reminds me a bit of like Robert Kubica, and after his accident and everything, making it back to Formula One as well.
Yeah, I mean, same with Grosjean taking a pretty ugly hit in Formula One, but just getting right back up and getting another seat in IndyCar, and obviously, he's thriving over there. So yeah, it's about getting back up, and that's really exciting. Now, I take it Correa is a Spanish national. Is that what makes the podium so special?
Just more so like the comeback from like severe
Oh, okay.
injuries and
Sure.
everything on the drive. I don't believe he is. Let me see. We're gonna do a quick fact check. He is from Ecuador, so
Oh, okay.
American Ecuadorian. So, but yeah, just the comeback from after a pretty severe incident and everything, that I think his leg was like shattered in like to a bunch of pieces, so he had like all sorts of pins and whatnot to reconstruct and everything, and to come back after that and work your physical condition and everything up to being able to even compete in Formula 2, and then to get up on the podium. It is definitely a huge comeback story for him.
Yeah, I agree. For the feature race in Formula Two, I thought it was really interesting. It was less actually about the kind of the drivers on track, in the sense that it felt like so many of the teams there were like evenly matched. A lot of their pace was really similar, where a lot of it actually came down to like pit windows and the differences in the pit teams and how quickly they were able to get their driver moving again. That actually like really ends up changing the complexion of the race. So that's another great one where the pit crew are the ones like that come in clutch and really change the amount of points won. So I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, and just highlighting the team aspect of racing
For
at
sure.
that level too. So yeah, a fun weekend with the feeder series. There are a lot of good highlights there. But moving over into the Formula One race weekend, why don't you start us off with our winners and losers of the weekend here?
So the first winner that I'll give you here is Mercedes for me. Second consecutive 3-4 finish for them brings them much needed points. They were during the race and during some of the stints in the practice sessions. Their pace was right there with the Ferraris. Obviously, they're this time able to finish ahead of the Ferraris as well. So that's really solid. We have the podium finish for Lewis getting the overtake on his teammate there, like towards the end of the race. That's solid. So obviously, not only do they have just like a good defensive get the race done type of pace, like they were obviously able to go on the attack late into the stint, late into the race. So I think that is really encouraging. We heard from Lewis that his side of the garage very pleased with the weekend that he had. And I mean, dude, honestly, the start that George had, like that could be a winner just like on its own merit. The my God, I don't think they showed the difference in reaction time, but my man, he was faster than everybody ahead of him. How fast he came through there, like that was such a sick start. So yeah, I would say one of my winners here for the weekend is definitely Mercedes.
Nice. I can agree with you on all of that, especially the bounce back from Lewis going from calling Canada one of the worst races of his career, where he finished P4, to actually feeling comfortable, happy with the car, having some really good pace in it and everything to get P3. Slight offset of strategies, which we saw with the Ferrari cars as well, where George was on the hard earlier pit stop at the end of the race for the second stop onto the hard tires. Lewis hangs out there a bit longer on his middle stint and gets the soft, medium, soft for his tire rotation there. I was a little surprised by really both Mercedes and Ferrari. That was a weird thought, I guess, in my mind to put their drivers on the hard tires. I forget who pitted first, but I believe that the second one was in reaction to the first driver switching. So I think it was, George pitted and put on the hard tires, and Carlos came into the pits like at the same time following him, and put on the hard tires as well. So both teams kind of opting for that strategy, even though the hard tires hadn't really looked that good across the weekend. I mean, I was a little more surprised, I guess, that they went for the hard tire instead of just going for a second set of mediums. I don't know what their tire allocation looked like at that point, but I mean, the mediums, especially on Lando's car during his second stint, hung on for a very long time there.
Yeah, and even was still gaining on Lewis like all the way to the end, right? So it's not like
Yeah.
he hit like a plateau at all in pace. Because in another on another day, that just would have stayed at a 5 second lead,
Oh, yeah.
right? And him not be able to close. So yeah, McLaren seems to have a solid understanding of their car's tire degradation and like what's going to work best for them. And also just some raw pace, being able to hunt down like right till the end. I really enjoyed the radio message from. It's funny how this just turned into talking about McLaren.
That's all
But I
right.
really enjoyed how Lando Norris on the radio, he was like, "Nah, I really don't care about Russell. Like we're racing Max here,
Yeah.
right?" And kind of like getting that message across to the teammates, and it felt like a way that he was like, "No, no, 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 we're looking forward here," and that was pretty key. Obviously, from pole position, you just want to win that race, but man, that George plus Max little pinch, like he could have just ended his race right there, but it's smart on him to hit the brakes and just take P2 in that regard. But yeah.
Yeah, and but to kind of bring it back over to Mercedes and everything, George's start getting the double slipstream, having the trust in the car. I think that's like where this weekend was
Sure.
like a big upswing for Mercedes. They hadn't felt that comfortable in the car for a while, even up through this past race in Canada. They were not feeling comfortable, not feeling very happy with it. But to hang that full throttle around the outside of two cars into turn one, when you very quickly come up onto that left hand turn two, like you could easily send it wide, be going through the runoff, taking the escape road there, and having to give up the position and everything. But to send it and make it stick was a great move from George. So yeah, really impressive. But what about your second winner on the weekend?
My second winner here for the weekend is Alpine. Second race in a row with points scored, moves them up to seventh in the Constructors World Championship. I think there's something in the air tonight where they know there's an end in sight. They don't have to deal with each other after a point. So I'm gonna keep running with the dead team vibes narrative and just saying like they're working together for the foreseeable future to get everybody across the line. But before they knew that one of them wasn't gonna be gone, whatever type of grammar that is. They felt like they had to be at odds and they're always bumping into each other. Ocon's like, wall riding on top of Gasly's car. So it's like, yeah, I think they're just happy now knowing that they don't have to deal with each other in the same team, and in some way that's like giving them clarity. That's what I think's happening.
Yeah, well, I think it kind of eliminated the competition between teammates, which is like
Mm,
desperately what needed to happen there, because they were just like, I mean, they people always say your biggest rival in Formula One is your teammate because they're your easiest comparison. They neither one of them wanted to give up an inch. Now Gasly is like, okay, I really need to keep putting in these performances. The team's moving forward with me. I've gotta do my best for the team. And I think Ocon is looking at it and going. Even though in Canada he was not happy with strategy decisions and whatnot, like he's looking at it as I need to finish races and put myself in a position to potentially get a drive next year.
right.
Whether that's in a Haas car, in a William, wherever it may be, like you aren't going to get a drive if no one can see what your performance is because you've crashed out or DNF'd every race. So if you're avoiding those controllable DNFs as opposed to like some sort of mechanical failure or something like that are bound to happen across the season. You just have to give yourself the maximum amount of opportunities to perform, which is I feel like what just looking at another driver who hasn't been able to do that. Logan Sargent has, I think, lost out on most of his opportunity to stay in Formula One, not necessarily entirely on pace, but because there's been so many times that you can't even see his performance because he's not finishing races. Like
Right.
he's spinning out, he's crashing, he's whatever. That you can't even get a good baseline of like where this dude's at. Um,
Yeah,
so
no,
yeah,
I think that's a really good point.
and so on my side, that Alpine was one of my winners as well. And
Okay, great.
yeah, and to go from like you had said up into P7 in the constructors championship and everything after going the first. Don't even know how many races without scoring a point. they have really bounced back, and I mean 8 points is not a lot, but it's more than three other teams. So I mean they're putting themselves in the best position they can to pick up those points, and be in those scooping up the P9 P10 kind of spots as much as they can. So big props to them. But for my second winner this week, I had Max, and I obviously he won the race, but I think there has been more and more conversation over the past few weeks of Red Bull not having the fastest car. We're seeing where Checo's qualifying at, where Checo's finishing, and everything, and he is just not being able to keep up, and that car is not keeping up with the Ferraris, the McLarens, the Mercedes, except for when Max is in that cockpit there. I mean, across the last 5 races, I think people have argued that like 4 of those Red Bull has not been the fastest, with McLaren being faster in like 2 of them, Mercedes being faster in 1, Ferrari being faster, and he's still won 3 of the last 5 races. So I know I'm a fan of his, but at the same time, it's very impressive that the other teams have caught up so quickly in the development race. I have to give major props to these other teams, because Red Bull, after the first race of the season, I thought it was going to be like last year again, with just a dominant Red Bull year where no one was touching either driver really until the very end of the season when Leclerc beat out Checo. That was the vibe that the first couple races gave, and these teams have caught up with their development. Their drivers are driving on a super high level as well across all of those teams. But Max is still finding ways to win. You heard him in GP on the radio in that lap 2 early stint of the race where he was behind George in P2, and GP is like, this might be your opportunity to like go. Max gets past George. George holds up Lando significantly enough that it throws off Lando's strategy, where he's having to take these longer stints in hopes of kind of having an off strategy and chasing down at the end. But genuinely, that 5 seconds or so of that gap that Max pulled on George where Lando couldn't get by is about, I mean, it's basically what ended up being his margin of victory there at the end.
Right. Yeah. So that's really crazy. So the conversation is now changing to like, does Max really have that much juice? And should we stop looking at Checo as underperforming? And Checo like is just the pace of the Red Bull compared to other teams, and Max is just like wringing the neck out of that thing. He gets his setup right.
I think that could be argued, or that maybe the Red Bull car is at least like about on par with the other cars, and that the other team's driver lineups are just performing better than Checo.
Right.
I mean, you could say that not necessarily that Checo is like where he's at is the baseline. Maybe he should be a little higher, or if one of those other drivers were in the seat, it would be kind of fluctuating in that those podium positions and whatnot. Sure. But yeah, the fact that Max is able to just continue to add to his win total and to extend his lead here in the Drivers' Championship. I mean, he is significantly bolstering the Red Bull constructors fight to just keep them in the lead there. That gap is not very large still to Ferrari, even after the double DNF. It's only a 60-point gap at this point, and Max has won 7 of these races, so 7 out of, I guess, 11 now, or 7 out of 10.
Hmm.
So definitely impressive to me, and I think that Max is he's just showing that when he's in those competitive fights, that just like if you look back across the whole of the season in 2021 and not just the last race, like he and Lewis were just super competitive, and he was finding ways to get wins in races that it didn't seem like that they had the best car on that day, and vice versa with Lewis as well.
Hmm.
But that is what a great driver is able to do. So I had to at some point give Max one of my winners for being the winner of the weekend.
Oh yeah, sure. No, that's no problem at all. And especially like on a weekend where yeah, like it wasn't easy. It wasn't like a pull, like a grand slam weekend, and that's when you choose to be like, wow, Max is really
Yeah.
doing work up there, huh? It's like, nah, he actually like had to kind of race for it. The strategy was involved. The sub 2 second pit stops from the team was involved as
Yep.
well. So just an all around hooked up weekend from his side of the garage overall. So yeah, I think that's a solid winner here. Tell me about who you believe didn't do so hot on the weekend.
So for me, my first one is Fernando Alonso. No offense to Lance Stroll, but maybe slight offense to Lance Stroll. I don't really. I don't expect him to be putting the car up there as high as Alonso and everything, but to be at your home race, you've been a multiple time winner here in Spain and everything. You have that opportunity, and for Aston to just be getting outdeveloped by the teams around them and just slipping further and further down, it's just not that Alonso did anything wrong, but in that car, he just lost out on what could have been a nicer home race weekend and everything there in Spain. I like seeing drivers perform well at their home circuits. It was awesome seeing Charles win in Monaco. I wasn't thinking that Alonso was going to win here in Spain, but picking up some points for the team definitely would have been nice. But the Alpines are, like we said, kind of starting to scoop up those last positions now. A couple of different times where the Astons are the ones who are being the first man out.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The kind of complexion of the midfield has really been shifting around recently, and we're seeing, yeah, like you said, kind of the Aston Martin kind of falling behind in the constructor war a little bit here, and the kind of development side of it. So yeah, these 9, 10 positions are really up for grabs, kind of for any of these teams during each of these weekends. But yeah, a little bit of consistency is what you need. Obviously, we've seen Alpine do it, 2 weekends in a row, maybe a third weekend, and we're really going to start saying, like, okay, there's some upward trajectory here. But as of right now, yeah, like you're saying with Aston Martin, we need them to be, slurping up those final points, or even, maybe tucking into the seventh and eighth position, like we've seen Alonso be able to do. So yeah.
Yeah, and they did earlier in the year, but last year we had a similar kind of trajectory across the season. The Astons
I think you're
started
right.
very strong. Alonso was getting podium after podium, really looking good, and then they slowly just fell behind the other cars' improvements and whatnot across the season. But yeah, and looking at my second loser, kind of
Hmm.
a similar developmental concern, but the V Carb squad, the RB with Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo, they bring upgrades into the weekend, and either didn't figure them out, or the upgrades just did not work the way that they were intended. We saw Yuki going out first one out, I believe, in qualifying. Or no, he started P17, where he finished his lap, and on the radio he comes across. He was like, "Oh, that felt like a really good lap," and they're like, "Yeah, it was, Yuki. Sorry, like bringing it into the pits." He's like, "Wait, I'm out." It was like shocking to him to feel that comfortable in the car, but just for the car to have no pace. Like, he was like, "I drove this car on rails this whole lap. That felt good. Like, where am I at? P9, P10?" They're like, 17. Sorry, bud." So that, and with Danny Ricks as well, similar scenario, starting P18, just a few hundredths off of Yuki's time in qualifying. They just really struggled, and that's rough, especially after bringing in upgrades and updates to the car that you're anticipating are going to improve your performance and all. But to no avail, unfortunately.
Yeah, pretty tough in that regard. Although listening to the drivers after the, especially Daniel Ricciardo after the race, they seemed, Daniel Ricciardo did not seem too upset. Actually, felt like he had a pretty good. They had a pretty good weekend overall. So yeah, I think just may take a little bit to figure out the upgrade package that they brought. So I guess just to contrast what your view on it was, he seemed oddly optimistic for yeah, like I would agree, like that was kind of my sense. I agree with your sense of the weekend. So it was odd to hear him be optimistic about it. So I'm gonna keep my eyes peeled for next this coming race ahead of us, because maybe there's something going on with the upgrade package that they weren't able to extract this time. But because Daniel said, I have some good notes, I have some good feedback that we can bring in, and like he was looking forward to Austria. So yeah, what seems like a tough weekend, maybe there's something in it. That's all.
Well, and for both cars to go through, finish the race and everything, even though Yuki finished P19, Daniel finished up in P15. There were a lot of cars that got lapped throughout the weekend and everything, so they weren't really standalone doing poorly or anything like that. Right. But maybe it's the comfortability. Maybe the car feels better, and like that's why Yuki was so shocked that he was out, because the car felt like really good, and now it's just dialing in the pace and everything. But having both cars finish 66 laps of racing, or 65, I guess, since they got lapped there. You get a lot of good data for the team, and like you said with Daniel, he's talking about having some good notes and everything. So yeah, maybe that will help, but I think it's and we saw it at Imola with Ferrari, that they brought these upgrades and everything at Imola, and it just didn't do much for them and everything. I think that you always anticipate a boost in performance when you're bringing those things in. But I guess it's just not always as immediate as you would hope.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Especially, if you're not able to get everything you would want done, in these practice sessions. I imagine teams could find a myriad of things to work on had they, are they given more time during each of the practice sessions? An hour isn't a lot. There are certain things that you like kind of have to cover. I imagine there are windows that I would refer to as like flex slots, where like you got to get your long run in, you got to get your qualifying pace in, you got to get like the short stint in, we got to see how the hard tires perform. And once all this checklist of things that you have to figure out for a weekend are done, it's like, all right, well now we can dedicate 25 minutes to whatever. I'm sure it's not as black and white as that, obviously.
Well,
but just kind of thinking of time allotment and just how you bring these into like an already moving system, right?
Yeah, and even with that, like your practice sessions are oftentimes at different times of day than when the actual race is happening as well. So you're
Sure.
like,
So like temps.
yeah, so temps for tires and everything, like you're I think that's typically why practice session 2 is like the long run session, because
Hmm.
practice session 1's like the morning, then you've got FP2's the afternoon session that's most similar to qualifying and race in terms of temperatures, if there's consistent weather across the weekend and all. So yeah, I think that probably like you said, there's a lot of things that they're trying to just get right in general on the weekend, let alone dialing in those additional like changes to the car and all.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure we're missing, large elements of it, just kind of thinking how you would go about, solving these problems. Because you figure the upgrades would be comprehensive, where they would be like changing elements of a bunch of different systems. Like it's going to factor into downforce, suspension, aerodynamics. Like they're going to factor into all of these things. But yeah, I'm just curious what it takes to like really get them dialed in and working to where what you have on track matches the data that you got to then propel you to develop that part, make it, send it to the track, put it on your car, and then get the what do they call it? The matching, the marriage of that data. That's got to be a tough thing. So oddly optimistic for Daniel Ricciardo. Seeing as how to our eye, it wouldn't be considered a great weekend, but yeah, obviously something there in it. You changed my opinion on one of my other losers, Sergio Perez. Maybe there's some things that we don't quite understand yet about the Red Bull situation. Are we just so are we just so poisoned by Red Bull dominance that like we can't even conceive we can't even fathom them not having the fastest car. So I'm gonna give Perez a pass here for this week. But my loser, and I'll just give this to you real quick. I think it's McLaren. Really tough. They squandered a pole position. They get beat out by P4 nonetheless. Like not even from like the clean side of the grid from P2. It's clean side of the grid from P4. So I think just like a really rough start from Lando definitely gets punished. So that's really unfortunate. And then Piastri, somebody for McLaren who we've been pretty able to, hang our hats on. He's been truly reliable, I think, in that McLaren seat. This was the first weekend that he really looked pretty shaky, not up to snuff. The off in Q3, setting him up to just have a dog day on Sunday. So honestly, really tough weekend for McLaren, and I hope they can kind of bounce back in Austria.
Yeah, and I think on that note with McLaren, like what it makes me so sad to see Lando so like just he's really hard on himself, which I think is
Hmm.
part of what has made him such a good driver and everything in his career. But it tugs at my soul. I like Lando a lot, and hearing him be so brutal on himself about kind of how unsuccessful he has been when he's started in P1. He has the 2 career pole positions, and he's had 2 other opportunities where he started P1 for due to like people taking engine penalties or different things. Where he gets eaten up on the first lap in all 4 of those instances, which is
Hmm.
just really tough. Like I don't know if it's a pressure thing or if it's just the other guys just have that little jump on him at the start, slightly quicker reactions and whatnot. But
Yeah.
I mean, he'll as he has throughout his career, he'll continue to improve and grow as a driver and everything. But But yeah, that's definitely a bummer for them, especially after taking pole position. Max only being able to really challenge for that pole because he was getting some slipstream help going around the circuit and all. But yeah, and a tough weekend for Oscar, who still, I mean, honestly, I mean, he scooped up some decent points. He gets 6 points. Between him and Lando, they still come out ahead of the Ferraris in terms of points
For
on the
sure.
weekend, which is
Yeah, he improves his position, which is good.
salvaged it to some extent, but shouldn't have been in that position in the first place.
Especially with the run of form that we've seen from them. Like my expectation is just like, oh, like you guys are winning races now. Like let's go,
Yeah,
And to get a qualifying like that, it's like, come on.
yeah. It is something that you can't really let happen. At least not multiple times if you're gonna stay
Sure.
in this fight and everything. Like it panned out this time, but what if he just hadn't been able to get a lap time in Q1 or in Q2, and he's instead of starting P10, he's starting down in P15, P20, just because he couldn't keep it in the track limits and everything, and going into this coming weekend where track limits were the biggest news story in Austria last year. They have added some gravel traps to try and kind of make that a bit more punishing, keep people inside the lines. But yeah, like you can't let that happen again this week and hope that it just pans out for the team.
Yeah, I mean, the window of opportunity may already be closed for the other teams if there is no fall off for Red Bull and no like aggressive progression from any of these other teams. We're just going to be stuck at the point margins that they are, right?
Yeah.
And nobody's going to be able to close. So I'm curious if the window isn't already shut, and if it's not already shut, you get very few, and I'm thinking from a constructor standpoint, you're going to get very few mistake opportunities like that. In a longer season, obviously 24, 23 races, it's a little more forgiving. But it's not like you can have those types of scenarios happening too often, or else, yeah, you're going to look up and quickly be very far from shore.
Yeah, well, and instead of gaining, so they gained, I think, 7 points on Ferrari this weekend. If they had the fastest car, on everyone said, I looked at the average stint times for the drivers as well, and
Hmm.
McLaren consistently was equal to or fastest on every stint throughout the race and everything.
Hmm.
And so if Oscar puts that car where it should be, could be a double McLaren podium potentially, or they maybe even take the fight to Red Bull. But say they take 2-3 instead, that's a 20-point swing in their favor instead of a 7-point swing. They would be just down at the they would just be down 20 points now instead of being down 33 to Ferrari for second. So even if the
Hmm.
battle isn't to Red Bull, that they're still in that tight battle for P2 in the constructors,
For sure.
and really have to capitalize on how quick their car is. So hopefully we won't have a repeat of that with Oscar and McLaren boys, but they'll be able to capitalize on the really good car that their teams put together, and they also have had very solid pit stops and just the crew in general doing a nice job for them during the weekends as well. So it's yeah, you have to take advantage of those opportunities.
Hmm. Yeah, so I think being one of the losers on the weekend, I think could be a little harsh. But yeah, I think the expectations are just through the roof right now. So you're kind of like, um, Yeah, no, I don't think there's a better way to say it. So yeah, those are the winners and losers here for the weekend. Let's just kind of fly through some final points. Any final thoughts for Red Bull?
Not really. I think we kind of hit all of it. But I did have a little bit looking at Ferrari. For
For
one, I
sure.
thought it was interesting with his contact that he had with Lando during the practice session that Charles just got a reprimand. Even Max and Lando were both surprised after the session that that's all he got, that there was no additional concerns. I mean, Charles just genuinely kind of drove into the side of Lando, which was just very bizarre to see. Entirely Charles's fault. He has the whole track on his side that he's able to take and everything, so plenty of space. But also just uh, on the weekend, some very unhappy Ferrari drivers. We had Carlos Sainz, who I I don't want it to sound too bad because we've talked about how every driver does this. But really, just being on the radio the second that he had that little side by side bump with Lewis during the race,
Hmm.
and calling that out, but also the incidents between the two Ferrari drivers as well, where Carlos and Charles were getting a little fight in during the race and everything, and then after the race, Charles was really like um, uh, pretty animated while he was talking to Carlos afterwards about and kind of both drivers being pretty animated with their frustrations with each other during the race and everything. So there's a little bit of trouble in paradise over there, which is not ideal. Like we said, when you're talking about needing to capitalize on the weekends, having any infighting is not going to be helpful.
Yeah, especially when it if you are two drivers who have the potential to win races with the car that you have, you're in a realistic fight for multiple points winning positions every weekend. You're going to be put in more scenarios where you may have to play the team game and not and I'm not even saying like one be given a position by the team over another. I'm not even saying that, but just saying like, okay, we're not racing each other in this scenario because we're locking in 3-4 to cover off like this weakness or whatever. And you need teammates that when they get that radio call, they don't back themselves and say like, nah, I'm just racing this guy, right? They have to like you want them to back the team in that scenario. So I think the more that they are going to be expected to be in like points winning positions, the more them having synergy actually seems to be important because at the top of the field when you're racing two McLarens, two Mercedes, one Red Bull, like it sometimes both of your positions on track are going to matter in what your net gain is at the end of that day. So yeah, you just want to see synergy between the drivers. I'm sure by the time we hit Austria, it'll be behind them. They'll be candid and whatever in the paddock and these things. But yeah.
Yeah, I have a feeling we'll get so like how are things this past week? We had a discussion within the team and just kind of leave it at that, and everything that they've got it worked out. But like on the side of I mean, they were on two different strategies there. Like we said, with the hard tires for one driver, soft tires for the other, just like Mercedes had. George got passed by Lewis because Lewis was on the softs and he was on the hard tires. You didn't
Hmm.
see any conflict there. They both were maximizing the points for the team. Even post race, George was not like, oh, like Lewis should have blah blah blah, or he wasn't on the team radio being like, have Lewis hold position or whatnot. Even though at the end Leclerc was hunting George down for that P4 and everything, we see the Mercedes team working well as a team and everything, and George just looking at it and being like, yeah, we're on different strategies. They said on the F1 broadcast, they're like, oh, they're like, George is probably going to be a bit upset about the team call to put him on the hard tires instead of yada yada. I didn't hear any of that after the race from him.
Right.
He was very happy with the weekend, just like Lewis, and back-to-back P3, P4 finishes for the team. They were just pretty content, which I think is, I mean, it's great that that's the attitude they took versus what we saw from the Ferrari camp there.
I agree.
But I think the only other big note that I had was just Hulkenberg just driving the wheels off that Haas car. I think he's had like 5 P11 finishes on the season where he's just right there, and unfortunately not able to bag a point. He was P11 this week. He was P11 last week. He was let's see, in Monaco. Oh, he was out in Monaco. Sorry, I should have.
Okay.
Should have remembered that with the two of
Gotta
the
get your
Haas
facts
cars.
straight, dude. Gotta get your facts straight.
P11 the week before that. So he has been just right on the cusp of points so many times this season, and just driving super well. Yeah, for the last 5 races, he's finished in P11, and that one being in Monaco when Magnussen took him and Checo out right at the start. So like that, I mean, he is driving like a man possessed for that Haas team, and doing everything he can to try and bag some points. So I just needed to give him a shout out. It's really solidifies, I think, what we had talked about years ago with him coming back in. It was hard to see with how bad Haas has been, like whether his performance was really up to snuff, but I'm kind of excited for him being with Kick Sauber next year, and then for 2026 when they become Audi. I would love to see Audi be competitive and for him to continue to drive well.
Yeah, I think we could call him Nico Trojan Horse Hulkenberg, where he was presented to us as just this. He's just a stand-in. He's not gonna be here for long. Don't even worry. We're just we're just trying to get through this year. This is just a filler year. Just don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about it. It's just a driver. It's just a driver in a seat.
He's the guy that the team tells you not to worry about.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Nico Trojan Horse Hulkenberg, and he's turned out to be like, if we were gonna do like senior expletives, I would say most improved driver, most fun to watch driver, most X Factor driver. Like he is the driver with the highest possibility to give you an interesting story from a like mid to like low end of the field.
Yeah, and
highest chance for an interesting story. Would you agree?
Well, other than Magnussen with the penalties, I think he's the only one, just because of the throwing wrenches into everyone's plans. But
I just feel like Magnussen had ants in his pants for one weekend, and that was like it was like Magnussen's like double twin brother. All right, fair enough.
But no, I think that I enjoy watching Hulkenberg. He's had some really, really nice drives, and so
agreed.
Big props to him. But I think that kind of wraps out my notes for the weekend.
Yeah, I would say the same. Pretty much everything else that I have, we kind of hit on in other conversations. Let us get into the cool down lap here, end of the episode. You told me you had a pretty funny story for us.
Well, so before that, I'm just gonna hit you with a quick couple of Max facts, because I haven't done that in a little bit, and so just to irritate anyone, Max has now won 51 of the last 75 races. He has 63 podiums in those 75 races, with 6 DNFs, so only 6 times that he finished the race that he was not on the podium. He now is tied at 4th in F1 history with 106 podiums, tied with Alain Prost and Fernando Alonso.
Wild.
26 years old. So yeah, there's your Max facts for the day. But to get into the cool down lap here, with a day in the life, I am not always the smartest person in the room. I sometimes think of others when I should think of myself maybe a smidge more. So I was at I was at a wedding this past weekend. Very nice time, having a blast, great time. Excited for the bride and groom, and happy to be there to celebrate. And so we sit down for dinner. Everyone gets their meals. I go ahead and start cutting up my steak and everything. I take a bite, I swallow it, and the steak does not move in my throat. And so I was like, that's pretty weird. So I tried to swallow again, and the steak yet again did not move in my throat. And now I'm like, okay, I think I'm choking. But instead of, getting someone's attention, doing something, I start frantically trying to just swallow this piece of steak that is lodged in my throat. I cover my mouth. Colleen looks over and sees me, and she's like, are you choking? And I was nodded the affirmative. And all of a sudden she's like, oh my God, Aaron's choking. And I have, fortunately, a couple of the guys there gave me a nice smack on the back. I started actually trying to cough and get this piece of steak dislodged from my throat, instead of trying to not make a scene at the wedding and upset people, and everyone just got their dinner, and I'm trying desperately, it did cross my mind that I'm I didn't want to even try initially to hawk up this piece of steak as everyone's just getting their food and everything, and be disgusting at the table. Instead, I chose to sit there choking for a wee bit too long. There were plenty of people around that were ready to help as soon as people in the surrounding area realized what was happening.
Of course.
But yeah, it was not my best moment of the weekend. I was perfectly fine afterwards. I went cleaned up, took a breather, came back, finished my steak, cutting it into some slightly smaller bites for the rest of it. And the night continued on, and we had a good time. But yeah, it was. I don't claim to be the smartest person, but I sometimes should maybe be a little more proactive for myself with things, and that was definitely a moment of that. It was one of the more bizarre things I've ever felt in my life. I've never had something like that happen that I recall, at least. So maybe when I was very little, I know babies and kids choke a little bit here and there, just because they're babies and kids. But yeah, I really there was a moment of people were like, did your life flash before your eyes? And I was like, no, like my brain just went, is this actually happening to me right now? Like at this wedding? Am I really gonna make a scene? And
Yeah,
like
that's hilarious.
I like could not believe it initially, which is why it took me a little while to react on my own. But yeah, that's my day in the life for this week.
Bro, where you're attempting to be so non-disruptive that you're like, honestly, I'll just die just so this dinner just goes off without a hitch. Honestly, it'd be better if I die so their wedding is still fun.
Thinking about it after the fact, I think that would have been way more disruptive to the wedding.
Yeah, corpse would be very disruptive, I'm sure.
But in the moment, it was like I was trying to avoid ruining the time of the people around me. The staff who continually checked in with Colleen the rest of the night to make sure I was okay. Yeah, just great wedding though. Like I had a blast.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if many people can say they almost choked to the point. I don't think I would have died. Obviously, like I said, there were plenty of people around who were ready to help me and everything. But yeah, I still had a nice time. But but that's my story for this week. You said you had a fun one to tell as well. I'm ready to hear it. A little less of my buffoonery. So
all right. So let me start this off with a question. What do you know about the prophecy?
Depends which prophecy.
Yeah, that was my reaction. All right, so it's 1:30 p.m. at a UPS. There's 3 people in line when I walk in. There's a lady up at the counter. She's got a problem. She needs multiple minutes. There's a lady with a cane behind her, waiting very patiently, but very aware of her surroundings. And then we have just like a young lady, standing ahead of me. She's got a box. And then it's me. I've got a box. I'm mailing out a box. Somebody's going to receive this package. I need it to go. All right. I'm standing there not 10 seconds. Dude comes in behind me. I didn't see him at first, but I heard him before I saw him. And he said, "Hey, mama, what's your name?" And then the girl turns. She kind of giggles and she, shakes her head and just goes back to minding her business.
The girl in front of you in line.
Right in front of me. Yeah. She actually probably thought it was kind of funny. She giggled, no ill will. And then the guy behind me, he was like, "Oh, okay, don't want to give me your name." Like, all right, that's cool. So that conversation ends. And then he locks on to me. And he says, "Damn, I thought you guys had the prophecy." And I'm like, wait, is he talking to me? Right? So I kind of opened my shoulder to him to see that he was addressing me, right? And he was talking right to me and he repeated himself. He said, "Yeah, what happened? I thought you guys had the prophecy." And then he continues. He goes, "Yeah, so why's America got to go be asking Great Britain for help if y'all got the prophecy for a year now?" And I was like, my mind's racing. I'm like,
"Sir,
what
I'm not from Great Britain."
No. I didn't know what the right answer was, but I was like, "Prophecy?" I said, "Not me, man." And I kind of laughed and I said it again. I was like, "Not me, man." And I think the only thing that endeared him to me was I was looking him dead in the face. I was looking him right in the eye, and I wasn't being mean, right? I was actually addressing him as a human, but still trying to be please.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right, dude. And then after that, fair enough, whatever, kind of weird. But then more people start filing in behind us, and this line is not moving, right? This lady, she's got a problem up there, remember, and there's still 2 other people, right? So this guy, he just starts chirping at everybody that's walking in, and there's action now, right? There's people coming and going, there's movement. He starts addressing this other guy that comes in as Gearson. like calling him by name. There's no way this dude's name is Gearson. There's no way he's ever seen him before. The look on my man's face is like utter bewilderment. He's like, what? And again, it's this talk of like this prophecy and whatever. And then it just shifts. Total shift of energy. My man just starts, the guy right behind me, dreadlocks, he just starts talking to himself. And it's like baby talk. But kind of in the vein of like, if I was being very forgiving and understanding, he was doing word association, and he was trying to rhyme like prefixes and suffixes of words, and like just seeing where it would get him. It honestly sounded like just a wordplay exercise that he was doing out loud. Like, okay, if I were to be very forgiving, right?
I feel like I've seen that with people with some mental health things going on before, where the association game has come up in my presence before.
For sure. And but there was a weird moment of lucidness, because some of those sounds that he was making were straight up baby sounds. He was like goo goo, gaga, and then like kind of taking it a little like further from there. But like the root was a lot of these like baby sounds. That went on for maybe like a minute. And then very clearly he said, nah, that's baby talk. Got like real serious.
So he was like, nah. He was like trying to do it, and then he like hit that, and he was like, no, that's not right.
That's what I'm saying. So like it sounded crazy, but he was very aware of what he was saying as well. So like wild scenes from this guy, right?
Oh,
and the line was still not moving. We were all just locked there in this one-man cipher with this guy in line. What was so funny was he had no package. So like by the time he got to the front, there was going to be nothing for him to do. They were just going to have to like,
can I help just kind of like
Right. So I was so happy that he was behind me and not in front of me, because like I needed my package to go out, right? I was so happy that he was gonna back up everybody behind me and not me, right? So me, the lady ahead of me, the lady with the cane, we all get out unscathed. But dude, the lady with the cane, she was like, dude, her head was on a swivel, man. She was like, what is happening in this UPS? It was seriously, it was wild. It was wild scenes. And I'm just happy everybody made it out of there, you know, with their sanity intact. It was crazy.
Yeah, that is very interesting, but I completely get what you mean, that you got there. Maybe you did have the prophecy. You got there at the right time to be ahead of him.
Yeah, for sure.
Everyone else didn't catch up on the prophecy. They were running a couple minutes behind, so that was your prophetic moment of getting out of there.
Yeah, man. I'll tell you, that was some silly shenanigans, but yeah, that's like the wildest thing that's happened to me recently. But yeah, I think on a more serious note, I just hope that gentleman is like okay, right? And that, you know, overall we were seeing him on on a tough day.
Yeah, you hope so.
I truly hope he's okay.
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely. But I mean, it's definitely interesting to come across like
for sure
someone going through something like that in the moment. I've seen bits and pieces. I've not been locked in, unable to move, because I feel like if you had even just been like, yeah, I'm gonna go and come back later, like that might have been even worse. Like
that's why I said it. Like, what's the right answer?
Yeah, I feel like you you made the right call. You hung in there, and then bon voyage on your way.
Oh man, my step rate increased so fast once I hit that door. I was like, let me out of here. But yeah, man, that's my day in the life. Hopefully that's a little bit of a funny story there for you. But that's all I've really got here.
I think that's a pretty good way to wrap things out of here. We're gonna quicken our pace here to the finish, but we really appreciate everyone taking the time to listen. We love doing this, so it's been another fun week making this podcast for y'all. So
Thank you very
that's all
much
I
for
got.
listening. This has been another Tired Boys podcast. Peace out, everyone.
See ya.